Hello! New location, new continent, in fact. Um, this is going to be a bit of a first for the channel because, as you can probably tell from the title of this video, I read the whole book instead of a part of it. Um, that wasn't really my plan, but uh, Shadows of Self was my primary form of entertainment during a very long cross-Atlantic flight. And my flight got canceled, and I got stuck in a hotel overnight, and then I had a new flight tomorrow, and then there was a baby behind me, so I couldn't sleep during the flight. So, long story short, I had a lot more time to read uh, between leaving my apartment in the US and getting to my apartment here in Belgrade. So, oops, accidentally read the whole book. Um, I do have a lot to say about this book, so this video might go a bit long. We'll see, maybe it won't. But I'm also kind of glad that I read the whole book in one sitting, because it's going to prevent me from making a fool of myself. Because the first thing I was going to talk about, when I still thought I was going to talk about this as two separate videos, is how Lessie, in the intro, the prologue flashback of the book, is such an interesting and compelling character, and how I'm really sad that Sanderson chose to kill her before the story ever started, so that I can't actually appreciate her as a character or get to see more of her because she's already dead. Um, Having now finished the book, I realized that that would have made me seem quite foolish in retrospect. So, as I said, there are some blessings to the fact that I didn't do this in parts. Um, so, because I've read the whole book, I'm going to talk a bit more generally about larger themes in the book and stuff like that. First of all, overall, this book is such a massive improvement over Alloy of Law. It's maybe the biggest glow up a series has ever had that I've read. The difference in quality is so stark. Alloy of Law is pretty definitively my least favorite Sanderson book that I've read so far. Uh, and this is definitely not my favorite, because my favorite is still Words of Radiance. But this is a strong contender for my favorite Mistborn book, like even compared to Era 1. Um, it's really good. I really like this book. Uh, and the weird thing is, my biggest complaint about the first book, Alloy of Law, is that it felt like the script for an MCU film, like a Marvel movie. Uh, and I felt like that just that felt weird to me. And here's the weird thing: this one also feels kind of like a script for a Marvel movie. But I guess the difference is this one feels like a script for a really good Marvel movie. um, it does also deal with some much more serious themes than Marvel movies do. You're not gonna see a Marvel movie question the authority and moral righteousness of God, uh, like this one does, or uh, end in an actual full-on revolution, a successful one. Uh, and I think that might be where I want to start with this. I'm going to start with the fact that this book, for 80% of its runtime, I was very worried about where this book was going, and I thought I wasn't going to like it. Because this book seemed like it was going to repeat a mistake that the first book did, which is that it was going to have antagonists who sort of have the right idea about society, like their criticisms are correct, but their methods are over the top evil for no reason. Uh, something that Batman movies like to do. The new Batman did it, and the third Nolan Batman did it as well. I don't know what it is with Batman movies and this particular trope, but you know what I mean. Like the whole, oh, uh, I am a man fighting for the working class against the rich elites. I'm going to fix all the injustices in this society, and I'm going to do it by burning an orphanage. And then obviously the hero has to stop them, and in that process, the actual justified critique of the society that the villain had kind of gets swept under the rug. That's what happened in the first book, so I was kind of worried that's where this book was going as well. But then it didn't. This might be the first story I've ever experienced that basically does that trope, but then actually follows through on it. Like, yes, Bleeder is obviously a villain, and Bleeder obviously had to be stopped, but the revolution she was starting in Ellendale doesn't have to be stopped. And in fact, the heroes then finish the job. Like the revolution happens and it's successful at the end. And that really surprised me. I was not expecting that. That's like way more radical than I expected from Sanderson, frankly. In general, I feel like Sanderson's politics are getting more left wing as he goes on, which I'm very happy about. I'll talk about that more in the context of gender in a bit, because I have some thoughts on that too. But uh, yeah, I was surprised by that. I'm not the biggest fan of the fact that it was carried out by the police. It's basically a military coup at that point, and those don't have the best history. They tend to end worse than they begin, let's just say. But it looks like the chief constable is a good man with good intentions, so hopefully it works out. And by the way, when I say it's way more radical than anything I expected Brandon to do, obviously the societal change that happens at the end of the first Mistborn book is much more extreme than this. But that was a revolution against a regime that was cartoonishly evil. Like, that's not a complaint, but I'm saying it's easy to take a strong stand against a literal slave empire, such as what the Lord Ruler had. But what this book ends up taking a stand against is a society much more like our own, much more akin to modern day capitalism, really, with the addition of an aristocracy, of course. So yeah, I'm very pleasantly surprised by that. I'm curious to see if Sanderson can stick the landing in the third book, because one of the problems with Mistborn Era 1 is that he took such a strong stance against the Lord Ruler in the first book, and then kind of started walking it back in future books in really weird and awkward ways, where you'd suddenly have Elend being like, oh, actually, he was fine. Which, like, was he? Really? Is that where you're going with this? But I don't think that's gonna happen here. I think, I get the feeling that this particular revolution is going to remain an unproblematically positive thing, I hope. Which brings us to the person behind it all, which is Bleeder. And, to an extent, Harmony / Sazed. So, this book does some interesting stuff with Sazed by kind of making him a villain. And that's where I feel like the book lacks some revolutionary fervor, because if I were Wax, if I were Waxilium Ladrian at the end of this book, I would have sworn to finish what Bleeder started and kill God. Like, if I found out that someone did to me what Harmony did to Wax here, I don't know what I would do. That would be the end, certainly the end of me ever in any way helping that person. I don't know what Wax is going to end up doing in the next book, but I honestly, sincerely hope that he is no longer willing to take any of Harmony's bullshit. Because holy crap. That was insanely cruel, what happened here. To both Wax and Lessie / Palm / Bleeder. Just completely, completely pointless and horrible cruelty on Sazed's part. I mean, not pointless. It had a point, but you can't do that to people, Sazed. You can't just manipulate them like that. It's horrible. And I'm kind of shocked that Sazed did that. It seems so unlike him back when he was a person. I guess godhood changes people, huh? So yeah, but Harmony is a very interesting character in this book because through him, Sanderson actually explores Ruin as a character far better than he ever did in the original trilogy when Ruin was alive. Because with Ruin was always a very one-dimensional, one-note villain, but through Sazed, we're kind of getting some of Ruin's perspective. Because Sazed is now holds the power of both Ruin and Preservation, and that means that he kind of has to balance their two outlooks, and he actually makes a very good point at one point, which is that he may have overcompensated in the direction of preservation when making this world, and as a result, society is now kind of stagnant. It is, as Preservation would put it, preserved. And it needs a little bit of Ruin in there to motivate it to grow forward. Now, I'm not necessarily sure that's desirable. Like, personally, I would take an idyllic but stagnant society over over one with challenges but one that keeps growing. Personally, I'm not big on challenges in my society. I would prefer to live in a perfect but underdeveloped utopia. But that's clearly not what's happening here, because Ellendale is far from a utopia, as evidenced by, the revolution that happens in this book. In fact, it's pretty messed up. But it's messed up by human hands, not Sazed's hands. Like, the nature of Ellendale is perfect, essentially. Like, they have everything. Which is also kind of interesting, because one thing that's very interesting about Ellendale as a society is that it's the only society. There are no other countries that we know of, which means there's no military, from what I can tell. The constables are the only thing close to a military that exists, and they're more the police than the military. Because you don't need a military because there's no external threats. I wonder if that's going to get explored, because there should be people elsewhere on Scadrial, right? Like, specifically on the other side of the world. Back during the Lord Ruler's time, there was civilization on the other side of the world, at least it was implied. So I wonder if that's going to come up. I wonder if the people on the other side of the world might have less idyllic circumstances and therefore advance faster and maybe end up coming here to invade. That's a possibility. But that's pure speculation, and I don't think it's going to happen in Era 2, definitely. Era 2 is clearly going in a very different direction. So those are some of my thoughts on the whole Sazed and Ruin thing. It's interesting. Like I said, it's just interesting to me that it's more development for Ruin than he ever had while he was alive. What else happened here? There's a shocking understanding demonstrated here of, like, Marxist theory and like Marxist theory of labor, and also the Marxist concept of alienation. There's a quote, let me just find it. Yeah, turned out a man or woman was much more likely to do good work if they were invested. if they felt ownership of what they did and could see that it mattered. That's a pretty basic but pretty accurate description of the Marxist concept of alienation, which is that workers are alienated from their labor because they neither directly benefit from the products of their labor, nor do they actually get to see those products, etc., etc. So yeah, Sanderson's going in a very interesting direction politically, which I'm very happy to see. Okay, that's enough about the larger themes here. Let's talk about some of the specifics of this book, and in particular, the characters. Because holy crap, is this an improvement. This is probably the biggest improvement from the first book. My big issue with the first book is that none of the characters felt like they had arcs, they didn't evolve, they didn't grow, they didn't really have any flaws or challenges placed in front of them. They just kind of barreled through everything that happened. And that's been fixed here. All of the characters are much more interesting now. Marasi maybe less so than anyone else. Marasi is like, she's fine. She was good in the first book, maybe the best in the first book, other than Wayne. But she's basically the same. Like she hasn't, like, she's grown a bit as a character, but I don't feel like she's become a more interesting character. She's the same as she was in the first book in terms of how interesting I find her. Wayne continues to be my absolute favorite character, and also really obviously inspired by Matt Cawthon, like, holy shit, Brandon. And in fact, Wayne gets so much good stuff in this book, in particular the part where he goes to visit the daughter of the man he killed, that I almost feel like some of it should have been in the first book. Like, in particular, that chapter where he goes to visit the daughter at the university, that really feels like it should have been in the first book. I feel like it would have added a lot to Wayne as a character to have that scene fairly early on. Likewise, the reveal, I think it's a reveal, I don't think this was mentioned in the first book, that Wax is part Terrace, and that he has a grandmother living in the Terrace village, and that he spent time growing up there. And that something mysterious happened, which still hasn't been revealed while he was there. I'm very curious about this. Did I miss something in the first book? Because I don't feel like it was ever brought up that he's part Terrace in the first book. Was it? I don't think it was. But yeah, so there's these details about Wax and Wayne that feel like they belonged in the first book, just because it feels like they're the sort of details you should know about your main characters right from the start. Obviously, we knew about Wayne killing the girl's dad and going to visit her, but we didn't get that scene. I feel like this was a better way to introduce that concept than having him tell Marasi about it. But the character who got the biggest glow up in this book, by far, was Steris. Steris went from being barely a character in the first book to being maybe my favorite character in Era 2. Like, Steris is amazing in this book. Every scene she's in, I am laughing out loud because she is hilarious, and despite what she says, she is hilarious on purpose. She is very funny. She has a fantastic sense of humor, and she is by no means boring, which is why I'm so baffled by the fact that both she and every character around her keeps calling her boring. She is anything but. She is incredibly entertaining. She's also a very clear case of Sanderson actively trying to fix a mistake he made previously. Which is that in Elantris he had a autistic character who was kind of a caricature. And I commented on that at the time, and I've been informed that Sanderson himself has said that he is very aware of this and that he is actively trying to fix that in future books. And with both Steris here and Renarin in Stormlight Archive, it feels like he is making a very, in my opinion, I don't know how much I can say this, but in my uneducated opinion, I would say a much better job of representing autistic characters than he did back in Elantris. Um, and Steris is, I mean, the fact that he's doing a better job is evidenced by the fact that Steris is probably my favorite character here, and she's not even one of the main cast. So I'm really hoping for more Steris going forward, and also more Milan. I find both Milan and Steris more interesting than Marasi right now. Probably because Marasi is a cop now, and cop is just not an interesting character archetype in my opinion. Like, I, I just don't care about her now that she's a cop anymore. Like, she was much more interesting as a law student, in my opinion. I don't know why she's a cop now. I mean, I know why. Her reasons make sense, but I don't like it. It makes me less likely to enjoy reading her chapters. But that's my personal anti-cop bias. So whatever. Now, that's about it for like the major parts going on here. Oh yeah, actually no, not it's not quite yet that. I do want to talk about the Khandra. I am really surprised that the Khandra are still around, but I'm pleasantly surprised because I was under the impression that they died at the end of Era 1, and I was also under the impression that that was stupid, because to me it made sense that obviously they would just immediately put the spikes back in and it would be fine. But the book kind of made it seem like it was a huge, like they were killing themselves essentially. And so I took the book at its word and I was like, that feels like almost a plot hole. Like, why are they acting like they're dying when they can just put the spikes back in immediately? And yeah, it turns out that that's what happened. They put the spikes back in immediately and they're fine now. So I was very happy to see TenSoon again. The idea of people having plush, like stuffed Suni cubs is adorable. I love it, even though he hates it. It's adorable. And man, TenSoon is bitter about some stuff that happened in the first trilogy, huh? He's not a happy camper. Milan, on the other hand, is very happy and fun, and she's just very. I just enjoy Milan a lot. She's not a character with a lot of depth so far, but she makes fantastic comic relief, and really that's I mean that's not necessarily something the book needs because it also has Wayne and also just in general a lot of comedy, much more than your typical Sanderson book. But I always welcome it when it's done well, and in Milan's case, the comedy is done very well. What else? What else? What else? What else? Yeah. So the last major thing I'm going to talk about is a bit of an aside here, which is just sort of my personal sort of special interest here, because I just wrote a paper on the Cosmere, on the books, and I wrote a paper for school on gender in the Cosmere and the way that basically every book until Words of Radiance presented sort of certain very stereotypical traditional quote-unquote gender roles as the default in every world, like all these different worlds with wildly different cultures and wildly different societies, and yet somehow we're supposed to believe that all of them happened to develop the exact same societal gender roles, where men fight, women are caretakers, men wear pants, women wear dresses, and stuff like that. And I know that Vorin culture in Stormlight is a bit is pretty weird when it comes to gender, actually, but even they still, like, on top of their weird gender roles, like the safe hands and the no writing and stuff, they also still have the very basic traditional gender roles as well. Like, women are still expected to be chaste and pure and gentle and wear dresses and stuff like that while men fight. Um, and what I find interesting is that it's very clear to me that there was a very specific point where Sanderson suddenly changed his mind about that and decided to change that. And that specific point is after Alloy of Law, but before Words of Radiance. Because Words of Radiance and Shadows of Self are both the second books in their respective series, and they both massively change the way gender roles seemed to work in the previous books of their respective series. Uh, Words of Radiance does this more elegantly by simply expanding the world beyond Vorin culture and showing us, like, all the different cultures, such as the Parshendi and the Reshi Isles and stuff like that, where gender roles are very different. And Shadows of Self seems kind of like it basically retcons itself, where now there's suddenly a bunch of female constables which were never mentioned in the first book. Uh, and stuff like that, and suddenly it's way more normalized for women to be in combat roles than it ever was in the first book. Just in general, it, the book kind of just pretends that that's how it was all along, which I'm fine with. Sanderson has done that before. He's done it with the age of, what's her face? Breeze's girlfriend. Breeze's girlfriend, her age gets subtly retconned, or not so subtly, between books 2 and 3, to be more appropriate for him. So I'm fine with retcons like that. I just find it funny when I notice them, and I feel like this is a pretty obvious one. Other things about this book. One major complaint I had about the first book is that Wax was overpowered. He was just killing hundreds of guys. That doesn't happen in this book. It feels like this book kind of dials back Wax's power level a little bit, which I like, because it felt like it was just a little bit beyond believable in the first book. That being said, though, someone did point out in the comments something that I didn't really think about, but which actually makes a lot of sense, which is that on the one hand, Vin was a Mistborn, so it makes sense that I was like, it's weird that, like my thought was, it's weird that Wax seems to be basically almost as deadly in combat as Vin, despite only having one power when she had all of them. But on the other hand, as someone pointed out in the comments, Wax has had like 20 years of practice with his one power. He has practiced his one power for I think more than 5 times as long than Vin or Kelsier ever had their Mistborn abilities. So it actually makes a lot of sense that he is, at least with his one power, with steel pushing, that he is significantly more competent than Vin ever was. And I like that. I like that we have sort of an example of what a truly expert professional misting can do, and that they're not. Although I have to say, in the original trilogy, mistings were kind of useless. Like Vin fought a lot of coin shots, and they kind of sucked. And surely some of those guys were very experienced. So I feel like there's still a bit of like main character syndrome going on with Wax. But I'll buy it more, I guess. I don't usually have this complaint in something like Stormlight, because there the characters who have powers are generally the only ones who have powers. But here, we literally see other characters who ostensibly have the exact same powers that Wax does all the time, and they're just not as good ever. Which just feels a bit cheap, if you ask me. Yeah, sure, the main character just happens to be the best at this thing, but okay. Um, that again, not a real criticism, just kind of like maybe I'd have written it differently. Anyway, brief talk about the future. So clearly, where we're going with this is that there is a new metal, and apparently, and based on the previous book, there's also the god named Trell who is around. Um, my theory on that is that there's a new shard on Scadrial, in addition to Ruin and Preservation. I don't know whether the shard is new in the literal sense, in that it just arrived to Scadrial, or if it's a shard that's always been there but was dormant, or something, while Ruin and Preservation were doing their thing for thousands of years. Um, and I that's sort of all I've got right now. I could be wrong. It's possible that whatever Trell is, it's not a shard. I I'm very interested to see where Sanderson is going with this particular sort of supernatural escalation of the plot in this series, because the first book felt like it was very much trying to not be a grand epic save the world story, and that was one of the few things I liked about the first book. And now it feels like we're going in that grand epic save the world direction again. And I thought I'd be more upset about that, but I'm actually not, because I actually think that I've realized, based on the first book, that that's kind of just where Brandon is the strongest as a writer. I feel like the grand epic plots just work better for him than the sort of lower stakes ones. So, uh, so if that's where the story is going, if we're going to have another situation where the entire world is in danger and needs to be saved, I'm not going to complain necessarily. Um, and I think that is where we're going, because the next book's title is The Bands of Mourning, and in this book we discover that the Bands of Mourning are some kind of very potent, powerful religious artifact, but they're not Sazed's bands that he had, his copper mines, because there's also the Bands of Harmony. I don't know what the Bands of Mourning are, though. It's not like it says at one point when Wax is in the museum, it says there were relics such as a replica of Harmony's bands and the Bands of Mourning. So they're separate things. Are the Bands of Mourning Tindwill's copper mines, maybe? That's the only theory I've got so far. Whatever they are, it sounds like they're something of like grand cosmic importance. So clearly that's where this story is heading. And also there's a new metal, which is also pretty important. Uh, I actually thought when it was revealed that Bleeder had a spike of an unknown metal, my first thought was that that's atium, and that what's actually going on is that Ruin is somehow reforming as a separate entity, because Harmony is like going too far in the direction of preservation. Like he's neglecting Ruin, and so the shard of Ruin is reforming its own consciousness separately from Sazed. Um, but I don't think that's happening, because they make it pretty clear that that is not atium. They make it clear that the new metal that Bleeder has is not atium. So, and it doesn't sound like atium based on the description. Um, so I can't really guess what that is, frankly. Um, the final point I want to make about this, which is not really a point about this book, but more about the Cosmere as a whole, is that in the Ars Arcanum at the end, which I now know is not written by Hoyd, because I read a few stories from Arcanum Unbounded, so I've been introduced to the character who's actually writing the Ars Arcanum. Don't worry, I haven't read MISTBORN stories that you're supposed to read after this, after the next book. And I will be making some videos on Arcanum Unbounded after this as well. Anyway, the person who wrote the Ars Arcanum makes an interesting point, which is that the Twinborn, so people who have both Allomancy and Feruchemy, are essentially radiants from the Stormlight Archive. Like, they function by the same logic, where they have two powers out of a larger set of powers, and each possible combination of two powers is unique, which is how radiants work. So that's like an interesting consistency across the Cosmere that I find that I really like. I don't know what else to say about that. It's just like a fun thing I noticed. Okay. Yeah, I think that is everything I have to say. Like I said, I really like this book. Much better than the first one. Huge improvement. And I will be reading some parts of Arcanum Unbounded next, then Bands of Mourning, then the rest of Arcanum Unbounded. So videos are gonna get weird now. They're not gonna be quite as quite in quite the same like one book at a time order that they've been so far. I'll explain my thought process on that when I make the Arcanum Unbounded video. So, see you next week for probably the first video about some of the stories from Arcanum Unbounded. Bye!